They laughed at her being alone until a stranger claimed, "She's with me." The wedding reception rescue, the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, sparkled like a fairy tale come to life. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting dancing lights across the polished marble floor where couples swayed to the gentle melody of a string quartet. White roses and baby's breath adorned every table, while golden candles flickered in tall glass holders. Creating an atmosphere of pure romance, Emma Richardson adjusted the strap of her emerald green dress for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The silk fabric felt expensive against her skin, borrowed from her sister who insisted she couldn't attend Rebecca's wedding in her usual work attire. She sat alone at table 7, watching the celebration unfold around her like a movie she wasn't quite part of. Rebecca looked radiant in her flowing white gown, laughing at something her new husband whispered in her ear. They had been college roommates, best friends, who shared everything from midnight pizza runs to heartbreak conversations. But somewhere between graduation and today, their friendship had grown distant, reduced to holiday cards and social media likes. Look at her sitting there all by herself. Emma heard a woman at the neighboring table whisper to her companion, "Didn't she bring anyone? How embarrassing." Emma's cheeks burned as she pretended to study her champagne glass. She had heard variations of this conversation 3 times already tonight. The single woman at the wedding, the object of pity and speculation. She wished she had followed her first instinct and declined the invitation, but Rebecca had specifically asked her to come. "I heard she's some kind of writer or journalist," another voice chimed in, probably too focused on her career to find a man. "You know how those independent types are?" Emma gripped her glass tighter, fighting the urge to stand up and inform these women that she was perfectly capable of finding companionship. "Thank you very much." She simply chose not to bring someone she barely knew to such an intimate celebration. But explaining herself would only draw more attention. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating, despite its vast size. Emma glanced at her watch, calculating how much longer she needed to stay before she could politely excuse herself. The ceremony had been beautiful. Dinner was finished, and she had congratulated the happy couple. Surely another hour would be sufficient. As she reached for her purse, preparing to make her escape to the ladies' room for a moment of peace, a shadow fell across her table. Emma looked up expecting to see a server offering more champagne, but instead found herself staring into the most striking pair of dark brown eyes she had ever seen. The man standing beside her chair was tall and lean, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face from handsome to absolutely devastating. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough volume for the surrounding tables to hear. Traffic was a nightmare. Emma blinked, confused. She opened her mouth to tell him he had the wrong table, but he was already pulling out the empty chair beside her and settling into it with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. "I hope you weren't too bored waiting for me," he continued, his warm hand covering hers on the table. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. You know how these work events run long. Emma stared at him, her mind racing to catch up. She could practically feel the shift in attention from the nearby tables. The whispered speculation had stopped, replaced by curious glances and raised eyebrows. This gorgeous man was claiming to be her date, and she had no idea why. She started, but he squeezed her hand gently, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget what she was going to say. "Daniel Morrison," he said quietly, introducing himself. "And you're clearly someone who could use a rescue." From the gossip brigade, understanding dawned, and Emma felt a mixture of gratitude and mortification wash over her. He had heard the comments about her sitting alone and had decided to intervene. The kindness of the gesture nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back, managing a small smile instead. "Emma Richardson," she whispered back. "And you're right about needing rescue." Daniel's smile widened, and he lifted their joined hands to brush a soft kiss across her knuckles. The gesture was so unexpected and intimate that Emma's breath caught in her throat. Around them, she could hear the subtle buzz of conversation as people took notice of the development. "Oh well, came a voice from the table behind them. Looks like Emma isn't as alone as we thought. Daniel turned slightly, acknowledging the woman with a polite nod before returning his attention to Emma. "Sorry about that," he murmured. "Sometimes a little theater is necessary to shut down small minds." "You didn't have to do that," Emma said, softly, though she couldn't deny how good it felt to have someone stand up for her. "I could have handled it." "I'm sure you could have," Daniel agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "But no one should have to endure that kind of commentary at what's supposed to be a celebration."
Besides, I was getting
"Tired of the networking conversations anyway?" "Networking?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "So you are actually a guest here?" Daniel nodded toward the head table where Rebecca and her new husband sat, college friend of the groom. "Michael and I were fraternity brothers, though I barely know anyone else here." He paused, studying her face. "What about you, friend of the bride?" "Rebecca and I were roommates at university," Emma explained, relaxing slightly as their conversation fell into a more natural rhythm. "We lost touch after graduation, but she insisted I come tonight." "And I'm very glad she did," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone that made Emma's pulse quicken. The string quartet transitioned into a slower, more romantic melody, and couples began making their way to the dance floor. Daniel stood and extended his hand to Emma, his expression hopeful. "Would you care to dance? We should probably sell this performance a little more convincingly." Emma hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his palm against hers felt surprisingly right, and when he helped her to her feet with old-fashioned courtesy, she felt like she was stepping into a dream. The dance floor was crowded with swaying couples, but Daniel guided her to a spot near the center where they would be clearly visible to anyone watching. His arms came around her waist as she placed her hands on his shoulders, and suddenly the rest of the room seemed to fade away. "You're a good dancer," Emma observed as they moved together in perfect synchronization. "My mother insisted on lessons." "When I was 12, Daniel admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I complained bitterly at the time, but I suppose they've come in handy." "Where is she now? Your mother?" Daniel's expression grew slightly distant. "She passed away a few years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, instinctively moving closer to offer comfort. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was, but she lived a full life. She would have loved this," he said, gesturing subtly to encompass the elegant ballroom and romantic atmosphere. "She was a hopeless romantic who believed everyone deserved their fairy tale ending." "And what about you?" Emma asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Do you believe in fairy tale endings?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face as if trying to decode some hidden message. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to think I might." The song ended, but they remained in each other's arms for several heartbeats longer than necessary. Emma became acutely aware of everything about him. The subtle cologne that smelled like cedar and rain, the way his jacket felt beneath her palms, the warmth radiating from his body. "We should probably return to our table," Daniel said reluctantly, though he made no move to step away. "Probably," Emma agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell that had settled over them as they made their way back across the dance floor. Emma caught sight of Rebecca approaching with her new husband in tow. Her friend's eyes were bright with curiosity and champagne, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "Emma," Rebecca exclaimed, pulling her into an enthusiastic hug. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to." "And who is this handsome mystery man?" "Rebecca Michael," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is Daniel Morrison. Daniel, meet the bride and groom." "Morrison." Michael's face lit up with recognition as he clasped Daniel's hand. "I was hoping you'd make it." "How's the consulting business treating you?" "Can't complain," Daniel replied easily. "Congratulations on finding your perfect match. Rebecca, you look absolutely radiant." Rebecca beamed at the compliment before turning her attention back to Emma with barely contained excitement. "I can't believe you've been hiding him from me. How long have you two been together?" Emma opened her mouth, panic rising in her chest. But Daniel's arm slipped smoothly around her waist, pulling her against his side. "Nearly long enough," he said with such conviction that Emma almost believed him herself. "Has been keeping Me is her secret for a while now, but I finally convinced her to let me meet her friends. Well, it's about time, Rebecca laughed. Emma always was too private for her own good. But I can see why she wanted to keep you to herself. Conversation continued for several more minutes, with Daniel fielding questions about his work and their fictional relationship with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. Emma marveled at how easily he wove truth and fiction together, creating a believable story that satisfied Rebecca's curiosity without revealing their deception. When the newlyweds finally moved on to greet other guests, Emma found herself alone. With Daniel again, the weight of what had just transpired settling over her. "You're incredibly good at that," she said quietly as they returned to their seats. "At what?" "Lying. Creating stories. Making people believe what you want them to believe." Daniel's expression grew serious, and he turned to face her fully. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Lying to you?" Emma studied his face, noting the sincerity in his eyes, the slight tension around his mouth. "Aren't you? This whole evening has been one elaborate performance." "The rescue was real," Daniel said softly. "Everything I've told you about myself is true. The only fiction is the timeline of our relationship. But why?" Emma pressed. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands clasped on the table. When he looked up again, there was a vulnerability in his expression that took Emma's breath away. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible in a crowded room," he said simply. "And because from the moment I saw you sitting here alone, I couldn't stop thinking about how beautiful you looked and how wrong it was that no one else seemed to notice." Emma felt her heart skip a beat at his words. The noise of the reception faded into the background as she lost herself in his steady gaze. This couldn't be real, could it? Men like Daniel Morrison didn't appear out of nowhere to rescue struggling journalists from social embarrassment. Things like this didn't happen to women like her. But as the evening wore on, as they talked and laughed and shared stories about their lives, Emma began to believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could come true. Even if they started with a beautiful lie told by a kind stranger who somehow saw her when no one else did. When pretend becomes real 3 days later, Emma sat in her favorite coffee shop, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing the words. Her article about sustainable urban development was due in 2 hours, but her mind kept drifting back to Saturday night, to Daniel's warm hand holding hers, to the way he had looked at her when they danced, to the gentle kiss he had pressed to her cheek when he walked her to her car at the end of the evening. She had given him her business card, expecting never to hear from him again. After all, their entire interaction had been built on a charitable impulse to save her from embarrassment. Why would a successful consultant want to pursue anything real with a struggling journalist who couldn't even find a date to a wedding? Her phone buzzed, and Emma glanced at the screen absently. An unknown number had sent a text message. "Hi, Emma. It's Daniel from the wedding. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I can't stop thinking about our conversation regarding urban development. I have a project that might interest you as a journalist. Would you like to discuss it over dinner?" Emma read the message 3 times before it fully registered. Was asking her out. Sort of. Maybe the professional angle made it difficult to interpret his intentions. But the flutter in her stomach suggested her heart had already decided what she hoped this meant. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on something that sounded appropriately casual. "Hi, Daniel. I'd be interested in hearing about the project. When were you thinking?" His reply came within minutes. "How about tonight? I know a quiet place where we can talk without interruption. I can pick you up at 7 if that works." Emma's pulse quickened as she typed her acceptance and gave him her address. Only after hitting send did she realize she had no idea what to wear to a maybe date with a man she had met under false pretenses at a wedding reception. 6 hours later, Emma stood in front of her bedroom mirror, second-guessing her outfit choice for the 4th time. She had finally settled on a navy blue dress that was professional enough for a business meeting but elegant enough for a date. Her long brown hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she had applied just enough makeup to enhance her natural features without appearing overdone. At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a gentle knock at her apartment door. Emma took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one final time, and opened it to find Daniel standing in the hallway, with a single white rose in his hand. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp white button-down shirt that brought out the warm brown of his eyes. His hair was slightly messed from the wind, giving him a more relaxed appearance than the polished businessman she had met at the wedding. "For you," he said, offering the rose with a smile that made Emma's knees feel weak. "I thought it might be presumptuous to bring a whole bouquet on a work meeting." "Work meeting," Emma repeated, accepting the flower and breathing in its delicate fragrance. "Is that what this is?" Daniel's smile turned slightly mischievous. "That depends entirely on how the evening goes." The restaurant he had chosen was indeed quiet, tucked away on a side street with dim lighting and intimate seating. They were shown to a corner table where they could speak privately without being overheard. Emma found herself studying Daniel's face in the candlelight, noting details she had missed during their first meeting: the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the unconscious gesture he made of running his fingers through his hair. When he was thinking, "So," Emma said once they had ordered their meals, "tell me about this project that requires journalistic expertise." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. "I'm working with a development company that's planning a mixed-use complex in the downtown area. Affordable housing, retail space, community gardens. The kind of project that could really revitalize a struggling neighborhood." Emma raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "That sounds like exactly the kind of story I love to write." "What's the catch?" "The catch," Daniel said with a rueful smile, "is that there are several competing interests trying to block the project. Some legitimate concerns about gentrification. Others driven by pure greed. I need someone who can investigate the real issues and help separate fact from fiction in the public discourse. And you think I'm qualified for that?" Daniel leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I spent some time researching your work after Saturday night. Your series on housing inequality won a state journalism award last year. Your investigation into municipal corruption led to 3 city council members resigning. You don't just report the news, Emma. You uncover the truth, even when it's complicated and messy." Emma felt a warm flush of pride at his words. It wasn't often that someone took the time to truly understand her work, much less appreciate the challenges involved in investigative journalism. "I'm flattered," she said carefully. "But I have to ask, is this really about the project, or is it an elaborate way to see me again?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers playing with the stem of his wineglass. When he looked up, there was such honesty in his expression that Emma felt her breath catch. "Both," he admitted quietly. "The project is real, and I genuinely believe you're the right person to cover it. But I also haven't been able to stop thinking about you since Saturday night. The way you smiled when we danced. The sound of your laugh. The way you made me feel like the most interesting person in the room when you asked about my work." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "Daniel, I know this is complicated," he continued. "I know our meeting wasn't exactly conventional. But there was something between us that night, wasn't there? Something real, despite the circumstances?" Emma couldn't deny it, even to herself. The connection she had felt with Daniel had been unlike anything she'd experienced before. But the practical side of her mind whispered warnings about the dangers of mixing business with pleasure, especially with someone she barely knew. "There was something," she agreed softly, "but I need to know, who are you really, Daniel Morrison? Because Saturday night feels like a dream. And I need to understand what's real before I can make any decisions about anything." Daniel nodded, as if he had expected the question. "I'm 32 years old, grew up in Seattle, moved here 5 years ago for work. I have a consulting business that specializes in sustainable development projects. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 25, which is why I have no siblings or extended family to speak of." He paused, his voice growing softer. "I work too much. I'm probably too particular about things like matching socks and properly folded towels. And I haven't been in a serious relationship in over 2 years because I haven't met anyone who made me want to try." "And now?" Emma asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. "No. I've met someone who makes me want to be brave enough to try again." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their implications. Emma stared into Daniel's eyes, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found only sincerity and hope. Their food arrived, providing a welcome respite from the intensity of the moment. They talked more casually as they ate, sharing stories about their childhoods, their career aspirations, their favorite books and movies. Emma discovered that Daniel had a dry sense of humor and an unexpected knowledge of classic literature. He learned that she had once wanted to be a novelist, but had fallen in love with journalism during college, and that she had a secret weakness for terrible romantic comedies. "I have a confession," Daniel said as they shared dessert. "I may have done more research on you than just your professional work?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "Should I be flattered or concerned?" "Hopefully flattered. I found your personal blog, the one where you write book reviews and restaurant recommendations. You have a beautiful writing voice, Emma. Personal and honest and funny. It made me want to know the woman behind the words." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Her blog was something she did purely for pleasure, a creative outlet that had nothing to do with her professional responsibilities. The fact that Daniel had not only found it but taken the time to read it felt incredibly intimate. "So what's your verdict?" I asked lightly. "Am I living up to expectations?" Daniel's gaze grew serious as he reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "You're exceeding them in every possible way." The drive back to Emma's apartment was quiet, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that spoke of growing intimacy. When Daniel walked her to her door, Emma felt the familiar flutter of nervous anticipation that came at the end of a promising first date. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said, fishing in her purse for her keys. "So did I." Daniel stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "Emma, I want to see you again. Not for business, not because of any project or professional collaboration. Just because I think you're extraordinary. And I want the chance to prove that Saturday night wasn't just a beautiful accident." Emma leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them again, Daniel was studying her face with an expression of such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Daniel smiled, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone before he leaned down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her lips. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, leaving Emma breathless and wanting more. "I'll call you tomorrow," he murmured against her forehead before stepping back. Emma watched him walk away, her fingers pressed to her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. As she unlocked her apartment door, she realized that somewhere between the wedding reception and tonight, her carefully ordered world had been turned completely upside down. But for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to the beautiful chaos that lay ahead. Later that night, as Emma lay in bed replaying every moment of the evening, her phone buzzed with a final text from Daniel. "Sweet dreams, beautiful. Thank you for giving us a chance." Emma smiled in the darkness, clutching her phone to her chest. Whatever happened next, she knew that her life had fundamentally changed the moment a kind stranger had claimed she was with him. And now, impossibly, wonderfully, she actually was.